All right, so today we're going to kind of continue our drawing process with more lines and circles, but we're going to be doing it in a slightly different way. So once you have your supplies, your paper and your pen, we'll go ahead and get started. Just kind of take a moment and relax in your chair. Maybe just kind of let your shoulders drop a little bit, or take a deep breath. I know life sometimes can be a little busy or feel chaotic, and sometimes it's hard to slow down. But give yourself permission to slow down right now. One of the ways that I like starting is by drawing a box on my page. And so I'm going to go ahead and do that with mine, and feel free to follow along with me if you like. The reason I do this box, this frame, is that sometimes for me, it can feel really intimidating starting on a blank page. And so by doing a box, it kind of makes that first mark for me and takes that intimidation out just a little bit. All right. So we're going to start our process today by just drawing some lines. So if you want to draw some lines across your page, it doesn't have to be a whole lot. You can see I'm just building those lines up. They don't have to be perfect. They don't even have to be straight. Just take a moment and kind of fill in those spaces with lines. What we've done is kind of broken up our page a little bit. Once you've gotten those lines, just kind of take a moment and start adding those circles in those spaces. They can be different shapes. They can be off center. They don't have to be in the center of the page. The center of those spaces, but go ahead and add those circles and those squares. Next step, after we do those circles, is to start adding those lines. We're making a little sun. It doesn't have to be a whole lot of lines. You can do just a few if you like. We're making little suns in those geometric shapes. I like doing a process like this because it makes me feel like I'm looking at stained glass when I'm done. The way I'll pull the example, the way the different colors and the dark lines work together, it kind of gives that feel. So there's something really, really nice about that end result that we get. Just taking our time right now, filling in those spaces. Know that whatever mark you make is good and right. It's okay if the lines kind of overlap or go outside the border. Because our focus today is not about perfection. Just like I said earlier, it's not about perfection. It's all about that making, that mark making. Last week when we did our group, started our group, the marks we were making, we made them at our own pace, whether that was doing a lot of fast marks or a lot of slow marks. We did it at our own pace, feeling what was natural, came natural to us. And I want to try or encourage you this time to kind of take your time with it today. I think there's a benefit to slowing down and just being present with this mark making. Know that whatever mark you make is good. It doesn't have to be perfect or symmetrical or even straight. You can see in my drawing, my lines are a little wonky, and that's fine. That's good. There's this Japanese idea of wabi-sabi that I talk about a lot. And I say it often because it's something that I need to hear and be reminded of myself. But it's all about this idea of creating beauty in the imperfection, getting that idea of it being perfect and right, getting that out of our mind and really focusing on just the making. And whatever happens was meant to happen. Whatever is just, it's meant to be that way. And so I want to encourage us to kind of remember that and keep that in our mind too, that it's okay if it's not perfect. It doesn't have to be perfect, because there's beauty in that making part. So once we get to the end, and if you're still making lines, definitely continue to make those lines. But once we get to the end, we're going to take our next step, which is just to kind of make those circles, round those edges inside each of those spaces. And so you can see what I'm doing. If I'm going in this square right here or shape, I'm just kind of making that circle, rounding those edges, kind of coloring in those spaces, softening those angles, right? Just take some time right now and round those edges, making these kind of circular shapes. You may start to notice that these harsh angles that we've done are kind of softening a little bit as we're rounding them. And it may give it a feel like a flower. And just take your time while you're doing it. Focusing on the marks that you're making, the shapes that are appearing. Just kind of filling in those spaces, those angles. And again, just take your time with it. You may not finish today. I may not finish my drawing today in this time we have together, and that's okay. It's something I can work on for a while. There's no rush. If you find yourself getting a little distracted or thinking about your to-do list today, know that that's okay. Your brain is just doing what it's meant to do, to think and to process. Just be gentle with yourself and guide your thoughts back to what's right in front of you. Maybe noticing the tip of your pen or pencil and the mark that it makes on the paper. Remembering that it's okay if those lines are a little wonky. It's okay if it's not straight. I'm just spending time with that mark making today. I shared last week when we were focusing on just the lines and the circles, that it was those basic marks, right? Lines and circles are so simple. And it's something that we can easily use to practice our mindful drawing. It doesn't have to be fancy patterns. And today we're taking those patterns or those marks and making a pattern out of it. starting with those lines. And then adding those circles and more lines. Notice as you're making your circles and those angular shapes, um, that these nice little bubbles are starting to appear. It's kind of nice, I think, to see those shapes appear as we're working through it. The drawing is growing right in front of us. And just take your time with it today. Making those marks, filling in those spaces. If you feel yourself picking up speed, know that that's also okay. Sometimes when I am working on a drawing, I'm really getting into it. I notice I'm picking up speed and I'm making those marks faster. It's okay. It's okay to go quickly. I want to encourage you to just take a moment and take a breath and physically let yourself slow down with this. Sometimes I have to kind of put my pen down for just a moment and take that breath. Pick it up again and keep going. But know at the same time that it's okay to go at your own pace. It's also okay to change the shape. Maybe as you're working and rounding the edges, you notice you need another line in there. It's okay to add that in there too. You're done adding those rounded edges now. Have you gotten to the point where all your angled edges are rounded? Feel free to pick up some color and add that into those shapes. If you're still working on rounding the edges, definitely continue working on that. Again, knowing there's no rush. We may finish our drawing in the time we have together today. We may not. And either way, that's okay. So if you're like me, you may have gotten to the end of the rounding edges. I'm going to start picking up some color and adding that color in. I'm going to be using some colored pencils today. So I'm just going to take my time with that. I want to encourage you to do that as well. Coloring in those spaces. Knowing those marks don't have to be perfect. They just have to be marks. Whether you have markers or colored pencils, maybe even watercolor. These are great things to add in. But know you can also use a blue pen or a regular pencil. It doesn't have to be a bunch of color. It's just about filling in those spaces. That's what I'm doing right now, just filling in those spaces. I know it's hard sometimes to get that idea of perfection out of our head, out of our mind. I know that's something that I struggle with. I want those marks to be straight and lined up. And sometimes my hand just can't do that. And it can feel frustrating. But when I take a moment and kind of step back and look at my piece as a whole, those little imperfections and things that stick out aren't as noticeable anymore. Those lines that we did that may feel like they're going outside the border, or the spaces aren't completely colored in, that doesn't matter as much when we take that moment to step back and look at it as a whole. Sometimes when we're making those marks, we get so focused on that one space. So when it stands out, it feels obvious and wrong. And the truth is, it's not wrong. There's beauty in that imperfection. Those little marks, they make this piece what it is. And just take your time with your piece today. Filling in those shapes, those rounded shapes that we made. And feel confident knowing that whatever comes in this drawing, whatever mark that's made is meant to be made. It's meant to be there. Change your colors out if you're working with colors today. Add in the lines that we were doing last week, just making lines inside those shapes instead of doing solid colors. Whatever mark that shows up, whatever mark that happens, whatever color that happens, know that it was meant to be that way, and there's nothing wrong with it. Just take your time right now filling in those spaces. You're working off of your journal, your kit that came in the mail. It's just a small page, a small space that we're working on. Know that there's no rush to fill up that space. And take your time with it. I know from my drawing, there's something that feels really nice about having those dark, bold lines and offering that soft color on the inside. And if you're using marker today, you'll start to notice those inside colors are starting to really pop. Just like with my example here, using those markers, they really stood out. No matter what supply you're using, no matter the supply you're using, those black lines, those dark lines will make whatever it is pop out more. And there's something that's really soothing, that can feel really soothing about filling in those spaces. Each week, each of these processes that we do will kind of build on each other. You'll start to notice um, how they kind of gradually lead into the next one. We started by um, just making some lines and circles, and then just kind of building that up a little bit. And sometimes it might not feel good to do this type of mark making, and that's okay. We're all different. We have different things that we like and different things that feel good. So if this process doesn't feel good, that's okay. Change it and make it feel good, make it feel right to you, whatever that means. If it's just making those marks inside those spaces, doing lines, that's good. If it's not rounding those edges, that's good too. Just take your time with your drawing today. Give yourself permission to slow down. I know sometimes I pick up speed with my own drawing and I have to set my pen down for just a moment. Know that it's okay to do that. And then pick your pen up whenever you're ready and continue that drawing, that coloring in. Taking your time with the marks, with the colors. Maybe you want to do multiple supplies using colored pencils and markers and paints. Well, that's okay too. And if you feel yourself getting a little distracted or your mind wandering just a little bit, know that that's okay too. As I said earlier, our brain is just doing what it was meant to do, to think and to plan and to process. So it's only doing what's natural. And there's nothing wrong with that. And if you find that happening, just take a moment, be gentle with yourself, and just kind of refocus your thoughts back on this drawing that's in front of you. You're noticing the way your pen or pencil, the way the tip goes across the page. Or maybe notice how those shapes are filling in. Just take your time with this process today. Give yourself permission to slow down. Know that, again, that whatever mark you make, whatever color you choose is good and exactly the color that needs to be there. Starting to notice there may be some lumpy lines. I know in my drawing, I can see some lumpy lines, some wonky lines, but know that that's okay. It doesn't have to be perfectly straight. Just as I said before, this is all about that mark making, that doing. Of letting go, a little control, and just kind of filling in those spaces. It doesn't have to be ordered or planned. Just kind of adding those marks, maybe letting your hand decide what color to put next to each other. If you do notice some wonky lines or things that stick out, I know it's hard to kind of get that out of our head. But when we take that moment to kind of step back, like I said, take a look at it as a whole, those things we see as flaws um, aren't as noticeable. We see the piece as a whole instead of those individual little bumps or wonky spaces. The truth is, those wonky spaces make the piece what it is. Maybe you want to add a little depth to your spaces. I'm going back in with a darker color on some of my shapes. Feel free to make this your own. And it's not about making that perfect piece, right, finished piece. It really is all about the making. And giving ourselves permission to kind of let go of that idea, doing it right, whatever that means. Kind of filling in those spaces, taking our time with it today. Maybe you're not very far along in your drawing. You're still working on those lines. Know that that's okay too. You don't have to rush through this piece. We can always come back to it. Just take your time with those marks. Adding those colors, filling in those spaces. letting that stained glass piece kind of show up. This is a space for your drawing only. This is not something you have to show anyone. You have to bring anywhere. And just kind of play around with those colors. Know that our time is coming to a close. I always feel like the time goes by so quickly. And as you're working on your piece right now, start to come to that stopping place. Like I said, you may not be finished. You might be like me and still want to add a whole lot more. Start coming to that stopping place, finishing that color you're working on. Putting your pencil or pen down.